When Clint Eastwood strolled through the bustling streets of San Francisco on a cold Valentine's Day afternoon. Nobody expected the Hollywood legend to stop for anything, let alone a frail young girl singing on a street corner for spare change. But when a heartless officer tried to shut her down, Clint did what Clint does best. He stepped in. Silent but commanding. What happened next wasn't just an act of kindness, it became a story that shook the world. Because, in true Clint Eastwood fashion, he didn't just give this little girl a gift, he gave her a second chance at life. It was a crisp San Francisco afternoon. The kind of cold that bit at exposed fingers and sent breath curling into the sky like wisps of smoke. Valentine's Day brought a rush of people to the streets. Couples huddled together, exchanging roses and chocolates, their laughter ringing through the air. But on one busy corner near Union Square, where the scent of roasted chestnuts mingled with the city's ever-present salt-kissed breeze, a different kind of love story was unfolding. Lily sat cross-legged on the cold pavement, a small guitar resting in her lap. The instrument was worn, its body scuffed from years of use. But to her, it was priceless. A handwritten sign, carefully drawn with pink and red markers, leaned against the curb beside her, singing for hope. "Help me fight my illness." At just 10 years old, Lily was frail yet unbreakable. Her bright blue eyes scanned the passing crowd with quiet determination. Strangers glanced at her as they walked by, some with fleeting sympathy, others too distracted by dinner reservations and Valentine's surprises to stop. A few slowed just long enough to toss loose change into the mason jar at her feet. The soft clinking sound blending into the city's chaotic symphony. Despite the numbing chill that seeped into her thin jacket, Lily wrapped her small hands around the guitar's neck and began to strum. The first chords rang out. Delicate but sure, she took a breath, steadying herself, before she began to sing, a love song. One she had written herself. Her voice, soft yet hauntingly beautiful, floated through the cold air like a melody searching for a home. It wasn't loud, it wasn't polished. But it was pure, filled with something no amount of studio production could replicate, raw. Aching emotion. A couple walking hand in hand paused. A woman waiting at the crosswalk turned her head. A businessman mid-phone call lowered his voice. The sound of Lily's song wasn't just music, it was hope woven into every note. She closed her eyes as she sang, pouring her heart into the lyrics. Lyrics about love. About holding on. About believing in something even when the odds were against you. Because today, Lily wasn't just singing for money. She was singing for a chance at something bigger. And as her voice carried through the streets, the universe was already beginning to listen. Lily wasn't supposed to be here, not in the cold, not on the streets, not with a guitar and a sign instead of toys and schoolbooks. She should have been at home, singing into a hairbrush, dreaming of big stages and bright lights. Instead, she was here, her fingers numb as they moved over the strings. Because life had given her no other choice. The leukemia had crept into her world like an uninvited guest, stealing away her energy, her childhood, her certainty about the future. A year ago, she was racing her best friend across the playground. Now, she could barely walk up the stairs to their small apartment without losing her breath. Her mother, Sarah, did everything she could. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning houses in the morning and waiting tables at night, just to keep up with the towering medical bills that never seemed to stop coming. No matter how much she worked, it never felt like enough. But Lily refused to let her illness define her. Music was her escape. When the hospital walls felt too small, when the beeping of machines became too much, she closed her eyes and sang. When her body felt weak, she imagined herself on a stage, a microphone in hand, the world listening. That was her dream, to be a singer. Not just any singer, but one who made people feel something real. And that's why she was here today, on Valentine's Day, singing on the street corner. She knew she wouldn't make enough money to pay for everything. But if she could help even just a little, maybe her mother wouldn't have to work quite so late. Maybe she could afford the next round of treatment without skipping a bill. Or maybe, just maybe, someone would hear her song and believe in her dream as much as she did. As she finished another verse, a little girl with pigtails tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, she sings like an angel," she whispered. dropping a single dollar bill into Lily's jar. Lily smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. She didn't know it yet, but today wasn't just another day. Because somewhere in the crowd, someone was watching, and they were about to change her life forever. Lily's voice drifted through the air, delicate yet powerful, weaving through the city's chaos like a thread of something pure and untouched. She sang with her eyes closed, as if she were somewhere else, not on a cold street corner. Not with aching limbs, not with a jar collecting loose change, but on a stage where nothing mattered except the music. And the city was starting to notice. A young couple holding hands as they walked past slowed to a stop. The woman, wrapped in a red scarf, pressed her head against her partner's shoulder. Listening, there was something in Lily's voice, something raw, something unguarded, that made them forget the world for a moment. A boy, no older than 7, stood a few feet away, wide-eyed, gripping his father's hand. He tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, can we give her some money?" he whispered. His father glanced at Lily, then at the simple sign propped beside her. Without hesitation, he pulled out his wallet, handing his son a crisp $5 bill. A group of teenagers, their laughter echoing down the block just moments earlier, grew quiet as they approached. They lingered at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, but there was something in their faces, something softer now, something listening. Then, an elderly woman shuffled forward, her movements slow but purposeful. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she carefully pulled a $20 bill from her coat pocket, folding it gently before placing it into Lily's jar. She didn't say anything, just offered Lily a small, trembling smile, as if she knew pain, as if she understood. Lily noticed, and something inside her warmed. Despite the cold air pressing against her skin, she wasn't just singing to survive anymore. She was connecting. One by one, people stopped. Some dropped coins into the jar. Some stood silently, simply listening. Others took out their phones to record, their cameras capturing a moment that felt like it was bigger than the street it was happening on. For just a few minutes, the city slowed down. The honking taxis, the hurried footsteps, the rush of Valentine's Day couples moving from store to store, it all faded into the background. Because here, on a cold street corner, a little girl with a dream was reminding everyone what music was meant to do. And without knowing it, she was about to change everything. Lily strummed the final chord, her fingers trembling from the cold, but her heart was warm. The small crowd that had gathered around her clapped and cheered, some even whistling in appreciation. Someone placed a single red rose in her donation jar, a quiet Valentine's Day gift from a stranger. Lily smiled, her chest rising with something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. And then, like a shadow creeping in from the edges, it happened. A sharp voice cut through the moment like a blade. "All right, that's enough," the man said. Lily froze mid-motion, her fingers still resting against the guitar strings. A street officer, dressed in a stiff navy uniform, stood in front of her, arms crossed. He was older, stocky, with a kind of expression that told the world he was not in the mood for excuses. "You can't be soliciting money here," he said flatly, his eyes flicking toward the jar of coins and bills. The crowd murmured in protest. Shifting uneasily, a woman in a beige coat turned to the officer. "She's just a kid," she said, her voice sharp with disbelief. Lily's mother, Sarah, had been watching from a few feet away, keeping her usual protective distance. But the second she saw the officer, she rushed forward, her heart pounding. "Please," she said, breathless. "She's not, she's just trying to help." The officer held up a hand. "I understand," he said, but his tone suggested otherwise. "Rules are rules. No unauthorized street performances. No soliciting money without a permit." Sarah's face paled. A permit? She hadn't even thought about it. Lily looked up at her mother, then back at the officer. Her lips parted but no words coming out. The crowd grew tense, watching as the officer stepped toward the donation jar. Then, just as his hand reached out, a deep, gravelly voice cut through the tension like thunder rolling over the hills. "Is that any way to treat a kid?" The crowd turned as one, faces shifting from concern to surprise. Standing just a few feet away, his weathered hands tucked into his jacket pockets. Was a man with a presence that turned heads even in the busiest of cities. A man whose voice carried more weight in a whisper than most did in a shout. A man named Clint Eastwood. Lily's breath caught in her throat. And in that moment, everything changed. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. All eyes locking onto the figure who had just spoken. There, standing a few feet away, was Clint Eastwood, the legend. The icon. The man whose presence could silence a room with nothing more than a look. He stood tall, weathered yet unshaken, a classic brown jacket slung over his shoulders. His hands rested casually in his pockets. But his piercing gaze, sharp as ever and filled with quiet intensity, was locked onto the street officer. Is that any way to treat a kid? His voice was gravelly and measured, the kind that didn't need to be raised to command attention. The officer, a man who had exuded confidence just moments before, visibly stiffened. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, his rigid stance faltering as the weight of the situation set in. He was standing toe-to-toe with Clint Eastwood, and suddenly, enforcing a street permit law didn't seem quite as important. The murmurs in the crowd swelled into whispers. People nudging each other, eyes darting between Clint and the officer. A woman near the back of the group clutched her phone, her fingers trembling as she began recording. The officer cleared his throat, shifting awkwardly. Sir, I was just following protocol, he muttered, his voice lacking the authority it held seconds earlier. Clint took a slow step forward, his presence alone enough to make the officer take a step back. That's so, Clint said, tilting his head slightly. A long beat of silence stretched between them. The officer hesitated, glancing at the crowd, then at Lily, who was still clutching her guitar, her fingers frozen over the strings. Without another word, the officer exhaled, raised his hands in surrender, and stepped away. All right, forget it, he muttered, just keep it moving. And with that, he turned and disappeared into the city. The crowd broke into scattered applause, people laughing in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. A few started murmuring excitedly, the energy shifting from tension to something else entirely: wonder, amazement, pure awe. But Lily? She just stared at Clint Eastwood, barely able to breathe. This wasn't real. Her heart hammered in her chest, her mind struggling to catch up with the moment. She had seen Clint Eastwood on TV, in movies, on posters at the bus stop, but never in her wildest dreams did she think he'd be standing in front of her. Why, you're Clint Eastwood, she finally whispered, barely able to get the words out. Clint gave her a small, knowing smile. So I've been told. The crowd chuckled, but Lily barely heard them. Her entire world had just shifted on its axis. The air was electric. People weren't just watching anymore, they were hanging on every second, eyes glued to the unfolding moment. Clint took a slow step toward Lily, his rugged face softening as he crouched beside her. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at her, really looked at her, as if he were seeing something deeper than just a little girl with a guitar. You've got quite a voice, kid, he finally said, his words low but full of something real, something that felt like respect. Lily felt her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't just anyone saying this. This was Clint Eastwood. Her hands trembled against the guitar's neck. She was still too stunned to move, too stunned to speak. Thank you, Mr. Eastwood, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Clint smirked just slightly. Call me Clint, she swallowed hard, nodding, trying to process the impossible. He gestured toward the guitar in her lap. Mind if I hear another song? Lily's fingers tightened instinctively around the guitar. Another song? In front of Clint Eastwood? She felt the heat of 1,000 eyes watching her, the hum of the city stilling as the weight of the moment settled over her. Her hands shook. What if she messed up? What if her voice cracked? What if she wasn't good enough? And then, as if sensing her hesitation, Clint gave her the smallest nod, a silent reassurance. You got this. Lily took a deep breath. And then, slowly, she pressed her fingers to the strings and began to play. This time, her voice didn't shake. This time, she sang her heart out. She poured everything into the song, the fear, the hope, the love she had for music, the dreams she refused to let go of. She sang as if this was her moment to prove that she was meant for something more. And as her voice soared into the San Francisco air, Clint Eastwood listened, not just out of curiosity, not just out of politeness, but because he heard something in her voice that no one else had noticed before. Something real, something worth believing in. For a moment, there was only silence, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but full, charged with something bigger than words. Then, all at once, the crowd erupted into applause. It wasn't polite clapping, it was real, thunderous, unrestrained. A wave of cheers, whistles, and shouts of encouragement filled the air. A man near the back hollered, "That was incredible." A woman wiped at her eyes, whispering, "She's got a gift." Phones were raised in every direction, capturing the moment, capturing her. Lily, the little girl with a guitar and a dream, had just given the performance of her life. But the biggest moment of all was still to come. Clint Eastwood stood slowly, slipping his hands into his jacket pockets. For a moment, he just looked at Lily, that same quiet intensity in his eyes. Then, as if he had already made up his mind, he reached inside his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. The crowd fell silent again, watching in awe. Lily's breath hitched. Her mother, Sarah, gasped softly, eyes flickering between Clint and the checkbook in his weathered hands. Clint flipped it open, pulled out a pen, and began writing. The only sound was the faint scratch of ink against paper. Then, with that same easy, deliberate motion, he tore the check free and held it out to Lily. "This should cover more than just a few songs," he said, a rare smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Lily's hands shook as she took the piece of paper, her heart pounding in her chest. She lowered her gaze, scanning the check, and then she saw the number, $100. The world tilted. Sarah let out a sharp breath, covering her mouth with both hands as tears welled in her eyes. Lily just stared, unblinking, as if she had forgotten how to breathe. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of disbelief. "Is this real?" someone whispered. That's life-changing." Another voice choked out. Lily's lip trembled, her fingers curled around the check, her body overcome with something too big, too powerful to hold in. And then she broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks, her small shoulders shaking as the overwhelming weight of gratitude, relief, and disbelief washed over her. Sarah knelt beside her, pulling Lily into her arms, whispering, "Oh, baby, oh my God." Clint crouched again, placing a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "You keep singing, kid," he said softly. "The world needs to hear you." The crowd, still buzzing with shock, began clapping again, not just for Clint, but for Lily, for her courage, for her resilience, because in this moment, she wasn't just a little girl with a guitar on a street corner. She was something so much more. It started with one video. A woman who had been in the crowd that day uploaded a clip of the moment, Lily's breathtaking performance. The officer backing down, Clint Eastwood stepping in, and finally, the moment Lily saw the check. Within hours, it had gone viral. By the next morning, it was everywhere. Major news outlets picked up the story. Headlines blared across screens. Hollywood legend Clint Eastwood stuns terminally ill girl with $100 gift. A voice, a guitar, and a miracle on the streets of San Francisco. Clint Eastwood's act of kindness sparks nationwide support for young singer's medical fight. Talk shows and news anchors replayed Lily's performance on repeat. Social media exploded with posts, comments, and shares. And it wasn't just everyday people taking notice. Celebrities started reaching out. A-list musicians, actors, and philanthropists commented on the video, offering their support. A well-known singer tweeted, "Lily, if you're reading this, keep singing. The world is listening. Let's get her to a real stage." A famous producer sent a personal message, offering to help record her song in a professional studio, free of charge. Lily's story wasn't just a moment anymore. It was a movement. Donations poured in from around the world. People sent messages of encouragement, handwritten letters, and even small gifts, guitar picks, journals, teddy bears, and the donation jar that once held small bills and coins. Now, it represented something far greater, hope. A chance at a future that didn't seem possible before. Sarah watched in stunned disbelief as medical bills that once felt insurmountable were being covered. She no longer had to worry about how to pay for Lily's next treatment. People were helping, because kindness, like music, had a way of spreading. And it all started because one man stopped to listen. Because Clint Eastwood believed in her. And now, the whole world did too. Lily never could have imagined how much her life would change in just a few days. After Clint Eastwood's legendary gesture, after the viral videos, after the outpouring of love from across the world, the real miracle began. Doctors, specialists, and researchers took notice of Lily's case. The best hospitals, the kind her mother never dared to dream of, offered their help. Medical treatments that once seemed out of reach were suddenly within grasp. And Lily? She fought harder than ever, pushing through every treatment, every round of chemotherapy, every day of exhaustion. But this time, something was different. This time, she had hope. Her mother no longer stayed awake at night, staring at bills she couldn't pay. Now, she held her daughter's hand with confidence, whispering, "You're going to make it, sweetheart." And she did. Months passed. Then a year. Lily's body grew stronger. The color returned to her cheeks. The fatigue that once made every step a battle slowly faded. She still had hurdles, but she was winning. She was getting her second chance. But one thing never changed. She never stopped singing. If anything, her voice became more powerful, more fearless, more alive than ever before. Her story had inspired millions. And she knew she couldn't let it end here. Music producers, record labels, and industry professionals lined up, offering to help her record her first professional song. She stepped into real studios where famous artists had once stood and recorded the music that had once only existed in her dreams. And Clint? He never asked for recognition. He never took credit for what had happened. He simply watched from a distance, his quiet support never fading. Because he knew the truth. He hadn't made Lily who she was. He had just given her the chance to show the world what she was capable of. And now, the world was finally listening. The theater was packed. Thousands of people filled the seats, waiting. The stage lights dimmed, then glowed golden, illuminating the massive set. Camera crews adjusted their angles, preparing to broadcast this moment to millions across the country. And backstage, Lily stood in a beautiful gown, clutching her microphone. Her fingers trembled, not from nerves, but from pure disbelief. A year ago, she had been singing on the cold streets of San Francisco, hoping to raise enough money for another round of treatments. Now, she was about to perform on national television, on a stage far grander than she had ever imagined. She took a deep breath. And then the curtain lifted. A soft piano melody filled the air as Lily stepped into the light. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of everything that had brought her here, the long hospital nights, the pain, the fear, the street corner, Clint Eastwood. And then she began to sing. Her voice soared, pure and full of something far greater than sound. It was her story, her journey, her heart. The audience sat frozen, entranced. They weren't just hearing a song, they were feeling every note, every emotion, every ounce of strength it had taken for Lily to be standing there. And as she reached the final verse, her voice soft but unwavering, she whispered the words that made the entire audience hold their breath. "This song is for the man who gave me my second chance. Thank you, Mr. Eastwood." Backstage, in the shadows, Clint Eastwood stood, watching. He didn't like attention, he never had. But tonight, he allowed himself a rare smile. Because he saw it now, what he had always known to be true. This wasn't just about survival. This wasn't just about luck. This was about a little girl who had found her voice and used it to change the world. The song ended. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the crowd rose as one. A thunderous standing ovation shaking the very walls of the theater. Lily stood there, her eyes glistening, her chest rising and falling as she took in the overwhelming applause. She had made it. She was here. And as Clint Eastwood gave her one last approving nod from backstage, she knew, sometimes, the right person walks into your life at the perfect moment. And sometimes, when they do, everything changes. Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right hand side, which is even more insane.